So there's a cool new game about to launch called Hardspace Shipbreaker. I love finding something like this that's not just another first-person shooter or first-person driver. It's basically a really clever puzzle game. You're working in a shipyard in space, breaking down retired ships and recycling all the electronic units and raw materials. It's a game about the difficulties of working in zero-G, where each ship has its own dangers and opportunities for profit as you break them down for salvage. This particular class of ship is called the Mackerel, but each ship in the game includes some randomized elements, so no two salvage jobs will go exactly the same. But this isn't a video game review. See, I'm a total LEGO nerd. I thought it would be cool to build a LEGO version of the Mackerel with the salvageable items you find in the game. I reached out to the creators of the game, Blackbird Interactive, and they loved the idea just as much as I did. They kindly sent me reference materials to help me make the LEGO model as accurate as possible. But here's the ultimate challenge. Can I make this break apart the same way it does in the game? And can I give this LEGO model the same kind of zero-gravity vibe that's in the game? I'm about to find out. First, the frame. It's the basic structure that holds everything together. It's got to be really strong, so there's a lot of technic elements in this to lock everything together. The walls have to support some of the details you'll see in-game, like these thruster fuel canisters. I decided to make the Mackerel fairly large to make it as close to minifig scale as possible, so the frame is 10 studs wide and 30 studs long. Next, a floor. This structure is removable too, as the game lets you cut the entire wall away in order to get inside. It also provides some torsional rigidity to the frame. Now, I gotta have a really beefy stand that can keep things upright even when the model is radically unbalanced later on, when displaying the dismantled zero-gravity version. I wanted to build the stand out of black pieces so that if I put it against a black background to simulate deep space, it will look like the ship is floating. This is one of the roof panels. Under this back roof panel is a Class 1 reactor. At this scale, I just needed to keep it from being a simple square, so players would be able to recognize this in-game item. The ships in the game can only have one reactor, but they can spawn in different places, so I'll put another one here just to show another option. At one time, this Mackerel probably had a long service life as a crew transport or medical ship or something, so there's lots of crew seating. They go in the hull. I still need to make 2 more roof panels, or wall panels if you believe that the enemy gate is down. One is pretty much the same as the first one, but the forward panel has some distinctive elements. As I said, with the randomly generated details in the game, I don't know if you'll ever see a Mackerel with this exact color scheme. Now for some of the exterior hull pieces. These rear pieces hold the fuel tanks. In the game, you'll have to drain these tanks before you recycle them so they don't explode on you. I also put a gap in these panels to allow for the mounting of the external nacelles. Alright, now for some modular hull sections. I'm going to make 3 of these. I'm using dark gray and lighter gray to emulate the different metals. In the game, there are titanium, aluminum, and nanocarbon. You should recycle these materials differently, putting them either in the furnace or in the processor to get maximum profits. On to the airlock. This is a cool piece. Again, I wanted to have something big enough to actually let a minifigure through. It's greatly simplified compared to the game, but it sort of has to be so the model has enough strength. But there are some details on this module, like an atmosphere regulator and a power junction box. You don't throw these in the furnace or the processor, you send these to the barge below you in the recycling dock. On this hatch panel, I tried to hint at some of the textural details of the in-game ship, with a door console to cycle the airlock and yellow warning stripes. This will let a minifig through nicely. On the interior wall, there's no room for a door, unfortunately. For the engine mounts, I'm going to use Technic again so that I can create the correct angle of attachment for the nacelles. These are probably the thing that is least similar to what you'd find in the actual game, but I decided to build them this way for strength. The engine mounts pass through the holes in the rear wall panels and then clip right into the frame. I'm not going to build the nacelles yet because they're pretty big, and if I attach them now, I won't have good balance on the model. You don't want something falling over and breaking at this stage. Okay, there's this very distinct tapered shape to the tail cone with an octagonal cross-section. I'm going to have to get creative here to get the angles right.
Caution, tether supplies are low. Salvage secured. Account credit applied.
One thing that drives me crazy with some LEGO sets is that there's gaps all over the place. I think a spaceship should be pretty much airtight. So what I've done here is create an almost gapless design. There's a thruster class 1 here. I'm going to make it fully octagonal even though it's more square in the game. Either way, lots of credit for recycling this valuable item in-game. The engine nozzles are arranged in a triangle shape, so I'll use a Technic wheel here to get them in the right position for this recyclable thruster cap. The mackerel has a couple of antennas. It's a small detail, but I want to give the LEGO version the right silhouette. Some of the iterations of the mackerel have external panels and lattices held away from the hull. This works well in steel. In LEGO, I had to try a few different versions of this to make it work. Okay, I need to put some weight now in the front of the mackerel, so I'm going to build the cockpit frame. There's some warning strips, so we'll embed those in the walls because there's an almost perfect LEGO element for that. There are these storage bins. I need 4 of those. There's a power junction box that I can replicate and an atmosphere regulator. This is the most complex part of the whole ship by a long shot. There are tons of removable items here that can be recycled. And here's a fun part, the pilot seats and computer terminals. Later on, we'll see if I can find a way to make these kind of float in 0G. The cockpit area also has recyclable coolant tanks, so we'll build those and attach them.
Secured. Account credit applied.
The big nacelles are one of the most distinctive parts of the mackerel. They can all be removed and recycled. I built these studs out on all 6 sides so I can get the right finishing details. Like these turntable elements to replicate the circles you see on the nacelles in-game. After I attach these 4 nacelles, the distinctive look of the mackerel should really start to take shape. Now that there's some weight on the back, I can finish off the front of the ship. There are 4 quarter panels that continue the lines of the wall sections. We'll do those first because once I attach the other stuff, I won't have access to these areas. On some versions of the mackerel, the sides of the cockpit have massive shells around them. This was the hardest part to get right. The shell is at a funky angle, so we'll use some Technic structure again. In the game, the insides of these shells are hollow, but I'm gonna have to take some creative license to make it work in LEGO. Here's how they attach to the cockpit with Technic pins. The final piece of the cockpit is the nose. The mackerel has a very distinctive off-center window, and at this scale, the only size that looks right is 3 studs wide. There's no LEGO element like this, so I'm gonna sandwich a bunch of transparent tiles into the design to make it as close as possible. It's a very snug fit. Everything lines up with no gaps. The panel on top of the cockpit has a pattern like 4 picture corners, either light on dark or dark on light. The cockpit lid panel attaches like this. It's on a hinge so you can look inside. I don't know what to call these things, but they remind me of crash bars on the front of a police car. I'm going to use a classic space minifig and dress him up like the Shipbreaker. The Shipbreaker's suit is a little more orange than this, but it's the closest I could find right now. I'll give him the utility grapple item from the game so it looks like he's floating in space, pulling on the panels. Okay, so now I have the whole mackerel as you would find it at the beginning of your assignment in Hardspace Shipbreaker. Now you gotta use your cutting torch and your handheld utility grapple to pull the thing apart. I want to give this model the feeling that it's just been cut to pieces, and those pieces are all floating around in space. I need to make a bunch of standoffs and some more stands to make this work. First, we'll do the back. We'll just keep this really simple, something sturdy enough to hold the weight, but slender enough to disappear when you kind of squint at it. I need a special standoff to make the thruster cap and thruster float out in space. We'll just use a black plate to have one of the fuel tanks suspended out the back. Okay, let's do the front. We'll need another stand to carry the weight because the whole cockpit is actually pretty heavy. We'll use a few plate pieces to get one of the storage bins floating and one of the coolant tanks too. It would be cool if I could get a seat and computer terminal out. Let's make something for that. This will hold the top panel of the cockpit open, and this will hold the other pieces out in space. I just need some really simple standoffs to hold the outside hull walls away from the frame of the ship. For the top panels, I'll just make one of these standoffs turn by 90 degrees, and for the back panel I want something to hold the reactor separately. I want the top panels to float, but I don't want them to look too neat and tidy, more like they're tumbling a little. I'll just use a couple of super simple standoffs to float one of the nacelles. Now I just have to put our little Shipbreaker character on here with his tractor beam tool. I'll just position him so it's like he's pulling this piece off. Okay, that about does it.
Tethers restored.
I'm incredibly happy with how this mock turned out. It makes a really unique display piece. Like and subscribe if you want to see more mock creations. If you're interested in building one of these yourself, check out the link in the description below for instructions.